full-time job is I'm a cartographer as well as a YouTuber. I make educational geography videos, which include old maps. So today's presentation, the title is History's Greatest Map Mistakes. So map mistakes can happen for a few different reasons. They, of course, can be accidental, they can be deliberate, but in the age of exploration, before the world had been fully explored, a lot of mistakes were the result of wishful thinking. So I tried to narrow this presentation down into just a handful of maps that I thought were both significant to world history, but also had some pretty good stories behind them. So I start a lot of my presentations with this map. I like to have a location that I feel like we can kind of orient ourselves and are familiar with. And so what you're looking at here is, at the top is a 1728 map of the Virginia-North Carolina line, and then at the bottom is a section of that map that shows what is today Henry County, Patrick County, and Pennsylvania County. So the story behind this map is, as people were moving farther west in the United States, and really what was just on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains at the time, the border between North Carolina really hadn't been that well defined. And so people that lived around the border area were getting away with not paying taxes. So people in Virginia were saying they were paying it in North Carolina, people in North Carolina were saying they were paying in Virginia, and then they just didn't pay any taxes. And so the two governments got together and said, we gotta fix this problem. So they put together a team that surveyed the Virginia-North Carolina line. It was led by a man named William Byrd, and as part of that expedition was William Mayo, who I think most of us are probably relatively familiar with because of the Mayo River. And so I'm showing this map because there is a small mistake on it. The Dan River actually goes farther west. Now this didn't change history or anything, but I thought was still a map mistake that relates to this area. So they thought the Dan River, it was actually what we consider the South Mayo River, and then the North Mayo River. They thought the south was the Dan actually goes farther west. And the reason for that is they didn't go far enough south to survey it. And William Mayo wanted to go farther south, but William Byrd wouldn't let him do it. He said, I would not consent to it for fear they should fall into some disaster, we being now near the path which the northern Indians take when they march against those of the south. And so they stopped in what is today modern day Patrick County. And this is eventually fixed, like 30 years later. Thomas Jefferson's father, Peter Jefferson, he makes this map with a guy named Jefferson Frog, and they start in modern day Patrick County, and they hike all the way to what is like the end of today Grayson County. And so they fix it, but then they actually make another small mistake. Where the north and the south branch of the Mayo actually meet, they put in Virginia, and that's actually just over the border of North Carolina. But no copyright laws during this time period. And the French, they make their own version of it. And I'm just showing this map because we actually have this map downstairs from 1755. So it's a smaller version of that Peter Jefferson Frog map. So that's downstairs here. So our first really big map mistake is right in the center. I can point to it. Right here, that is called the Appalachian Salt Lake. And so we know that not to exist, otherwise we would be underwater right now. And you can see the Chesapeake Bay. This is the Chesapeake right here, and this is the James River right here. All right, so the Chesapeake is joined with the Potomac there. In real life, the Chesapeake kind of goes over to the west or to the east. So I just want to introduce these three people here before I tell the story behind this map mistake. So this is John Smith. I think most of us are probably pretty familiar with him. He's captain, colonial governor, explorer, soldier, and he was also a cartographer. And then we've got Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson was also an explorer, He was a friend of John Smith's. Hudson's Bay is named after him. Hudson's River is named after him. And then you have Jodocus Hondius. So Jodocus Hondius was a Dutch cartographer. So the story of this starts with Henry Hudson. He comes back from his second failed voyage to find the Northeast Passage. He comes back in August of 1608, and he's fired by the Muscovy Company. He's unemployed, and he's at his London home when this man who worked for the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, he approached him at his home, and he said, "Would you be interested in giving this another try, to find the Northeast Passage?" And he says, it's impossible. I've tried it twice. It's blocked by ice. We need to look for the Northwest Passage. And Emmanuel Van Meteren, who was the guy that approached him, he said, "Well, I just don't know if the Dutch East India Company is really interested in that. We're really looking for the Northeast Passage. But why don't you come on with me to the Netherlands, and you can talk to the board of directors about it." And so he does. He comes with him to the Netherlands. And so while he's in the Netherlands, he stays at the home of Jodocus Hondius, the man I just showed you earlier. And while he's staying at his home, a package arrives. And in that package is maps and letters that came from John Smith. So John Smith was at Jamestown, and he sent him this package because he was friends with him. And he knew that he was looking for the Northeast or Northwest Passage, and he thinks that he might have found a way. Now, in the package, the letters, the maps, they're lost. But we do have some clues on what they probably looked like, one being this manuscript map. So this was a map that would have been sent the same day that he sent them to Henry Hudson. This map survived because it showed up in the Spanish archives, because a Spanish spy intercepted the map. He gave it to the Spanish king, which was really interesting because the Spanish never attacked Jamestown, even though they knew that it was there. So this, again, is the Chesapeake. It's like you're sailing from Europe towards Virginia. North is actually pointed to the right on this map, and this is the Chesapeake and the Potomac. It's kind of joined at this point. So it wasn't really thoroughly surveyed at this point. Jamestown is located right here. So these are the rivers within the Chesapeake. So the other clue we have is that Jodocus Hondius used all of the maps that John Smith had sent Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson let him see them, and he made maps of his own. So these are three different sections of three different maps that show this salt lake, or this inland lake right here, right there, and then right there. So he used his maps to make these. So where did this idea even come from? Because Smith surely never saw an inland salt lake. So the idea, what started this was in Europe, there was this theory, and there was rumors going around that the Pacific Ocean could be reached not by an ocean or the Northwest Passage going around the continent, but actually going through the continent. So there was this theory that there was a series of navigable rivers that would reach other bodies of water, and then eventually you would reach the Pacific Ocean. And so Smith came to Virginia with this bias that that's how I'm going to reach the Pacific Ocean. And so he immediately starts looking for it, and while he's looking for it, he gets captured, and then Chico Hatton asks him, why are you selling up these rivers? And he says, well, I'm looking for this rumored inland sea. And Chico Hatton says, well, it's back there. And then he asks Chico Hatton's brother. His brother tells him the same thing. He asks another prisoner there. The prisoner tells him the same thing. There was a discrepancy between how long it would take you. Some say it would take 5 days to get there. Some said that it would take you 8 days to get there. But they're telling him that this exists. And so again, you can see how these two maps are similar. They do have some differences, which Smith probably sent multiple maps. Van Meteren, he was also an historian, the guy that came to Hudson. He wrote that he sent multiple maps, so he probably sent more later on. But you can see a similarity, the biggest one being the shape of the Chesapeake that is merged with the Potomac River there. But literally the day that he sent those maps, he started 2 summer voyages to go and look for the Northwest Passage. Smith did. And so both lasted like 2 or 3 weeks. He goes on one and comes back, starts back a couple days later, and he goes up every single river within the Chesapeake region except for the James. And of course he hits the fall line on every single one, and there's no, he's unable to reach this inland sea that he believes exists. And so on this map, there's still 2 navigable rivers. So even after he did his summer exploration, he apparently still believed that there was 2 rivers that could connect to it. So the bottom one there, that's the James River, and the James River is the only river within the Chesapeake that Smith did not explore for himself. And so he probably had a good reason for believing that it's still connected and that he needed to explore it. So Christopher Newport did explore it. He went past the fall line, but he told Smith that he had to stay at the fort and guard the fort. And Smith was probably unable to ask Christopher Newport for the information because they weren't very good friends. Christopher Newport had tried to have Smith killed when they first got to Virginia, and then he opened a letter saying that he was a leader of the colony, so then he couldn't execute him anymore. And so they weren't very good friends, so he probably couldn't ask him. Not to mention that Smith was committing treason by sending this information to someone working for the Dutch at the time. And there's also evidence that has come out that people were dying at Jamestown because the water was brackish. And Cheapo Hatton had told Smith that there was a salt lake, or an inland salt lake, and then when storms happened in it, it would push water into the rivers, making it brackish. And so maybe it was better understood by Smith and the natives that the water was brackish not because of a drought that was occurring that was making inland the salt water come further inland, but that it was actually coming into the rivers from the ocean because of these storms. And then there's also one at the 40th parallel, and this one at about the 40th parallel or just above it, the natives have been telling him there was multiple rivers that connected to this inland salt lake. And he probably thought that it must just be outside of the Chesapeake region because he had not explored that area yet. So these maps don't really seem to matter. Hudson, he doesn't really say anything to the VOC. He's probably afraid that he's going to lose his job, and he just kind of keeps his mouth shut about it. But he was probably thinking that, I really want to take the Northwest Passage. I'm convinced by Smith. So anyway, he gets the job. The VOC is probably suspicious. They made him sign a contract saying specifically that he would look for the Northeast and not the Northwest. And he takes off for the Northeast Passage. And just like he said, he hits ice, and he's not going to find it. And so he turns the ship around, and against VOC orders, he heads right for North America to look for the Northwest Passage. And when he gets there, he goes up and down the coast, and he comes across a river at about the 40th parallel, or just above it, like Smith had said. Van Meteren, he said that Hudson was most moved by letters and maps one Captain Smith had sent him from Virginia, by which he indicated a sea suitable for sailing around their southern colony on the north, and from there going to the Western Sea. And so he finds a river at about the 40th parallel. It's a little bit heading towards more north than he was probably anticipating, but he sails up it. Unfortunately, he eventually hits a waterfall. He has to turn around. There's no Northwest Passage. So he goes home disappointed. But what he does do is he takes lots of notes, great observations. He talks about how there's tons of beavers, there's friendly natives to be traded with, the land is fertile. And so the Dutch like what they see. They send more expeditions. The expeditions, they like what they see. So the Dutch decide that they're going to colonize it. They call it New Netherland. They make the seat of government New Amsterdam, which eventually turned into New York City. And so a large reason for the founding of New York City was actually because of that Appalachian salt lake that Smith said could be reached by these navigable rivers. But this wasn't the first inland sea that existed in the middle of North America. So this is called the Sea of Berezano, and it's named after Giovanni de Berezano. He was an Italian explorer. He was exploring on behalf of the French. And in 1524, he wrote, "We found there an isthmus 1 mile wide, about 200 miles long, in which we could see the eastern sea from the ship, halfway between west and north. This is doubtless the one which goes around the tip of India, China, and Cathay. We sailed along this isthmus, hoping all the time to find some strait or real promontory where the land might end to the north, and we could reach those blessed shores of Cathay. So where he actually was the Outer Banks, North Carolina. So here's just another map that I think better displays that isthmus that he drew. You can see Florida right here. Now, the Appalachian Salt Lake was something different. If anything, it was probably an early hint at the Great Lakes. So, from those summer expeditions, Smith made an unbelievably accurate map of Virginia. So again, it's like you're sailing towards Virginia from Europe. So you can see the Chesapeake Bay right here, and then James River right here. So some interesting features on this map. I put red dots over where all of the crosses are. The crosses, they represent how far Smith went himself. So anything past the crosses, the natives told him what was there. So he probably had a good amount of confidence in what they were telling him to be true, but he thought it was still something to note on the map that he didn't actually see it for himself. But important to this story is this map was published in 1612, and there's still a river at about the 40th parallel. I don't know for sure that it's supposed to be the same river, but it does look a little bit suspicious. In this case, it looks like it just kind of fades away, and then directly across from it is a giant lake up on the top of the map there. So some other interesting features here. On the right, you have a Susquehannock Indian. Smith thought that was important to put because he said they were a giant-like people. And there's no evidence that they were giant. There are some theories. Some think that maybe they sent their largest warriors to meet Smith to intimidate him. And then right here is a longhouse. This is what Smith saw when he was captured with Chief Powhatan right there in the center. All of these blue dots are Indian villages. This is Smith's coat of arms. It has, in Latin, it says to conquer is to live. And then there's 3 heads, and this is because when he was a mercenary, the Prince of Transylvania gifted him this coat of arms. He killed these 3 men and beheaded them in single combat duels. And he also gifted them a horse. And it says discovered and described by Captain John Smith, which is kind of in 1606, which is kind of interesting because the voyage for the New World didn't leave till 1606. They arrived in 1607, and then the surveys he took for this map wasn't until the summer of 1608. And this is just another picture of a map that shows where some recognizable places that we know to exist today. So that's really just how accurate this map actually is. And this map was used for 50 years until a man named St. Augustine Herman made a new survey like 50, 60 years later. So this was used for a really long time. And other countries, of course, copied it, just like the map I showed you earlier. This is by Jodocus Hondius's son, Henricus Hondius. He made a copy. He made a few changes. The Native American is looking inward. He got rid of his coat of arms. He added mountains, which if you're familiar with the geography of Virginia, there's no mountains in the coastal regions. So yeah, they decided to add that. Might have just been for aesthetic purposes. I also brought this map with me today. I brought this map with me. I brought this map as well. This map is from the same family, from the Hondius family. It's by Jan Janssen, so he was Jodocus Hondius's son-in-law, and it's only about 6 by 7 inches, but the reason I brought it is because you can't really see on the screen here, but it has that Appalachian Salt Lake on it. It's not labeled, but you can see by the way it's drawn of it's supposed to represent this inland body of water. So our next map here is the island of California. Yeah, I get a lot of I wish when I show this map. But the island of California, it gets its finds its roots in a 1510 Spanish romance novel, and in the novel it states, know that on the right hand of the Indies there is an island called California, very close to the site of the terrestrial paradise. And so when the Spanish, when they were exploring and they found the Gulf of California, they find the Baja Peninsula. They didn't sail all the way up, and they think it's an island. Very soon after, it was discovered that it was in fact a peninsula, but it was too late. Some maps had it as an island for the next 100 years, and some didn't. And so here's another map, a map of North America, again showing California as an island. And our next map here is a 1570 map of the world. This came from the first atlas ever published, and it was by Abraham Ortelius. So Europe, Asia, Africa, I mean, they're all almost perfect. So, pretty impressive, 1570. North America is starting to take shape. California is no longer an island on this map. And South America, some people call this the potato South America because they say it looks like a potato. And then you see this giant landmass in the bottom, and this is not Antarctica, and this is not Australia. So they had not been discovered yet. So what this is called Terra Australis. So it had a few different names in history, but Terra Australis was the most commonly used name. So it finds its origins over 2,000 years ago to the ancient Greeks. So believe it or not, they actually believed the world was round, and they had a few different theories about how the world worked. And one was that all of the hemispheres had to have an equal amount of land, otherwise the world would just topple over. So they got some things right and some things were a little bit off. So they thought the world would just topple over if it wasn't all equal. They also believed in this climate theory that it was too cold around the north and the south poles for people to live. They believed in the temperate zone was the only place that life could survive. But then they believed that there was something called the torrid zone, and that it was so hot that the sun would cook you, the ocean would boil you, or monsters would eat you. And so it was believed that the other temperate zone could not be reached because of this torrid zone. And there was a lot of debate on, is there life in the other temperate zone? Some believed, there had to be life in the other temperate zone because there's life in this temperate zone. Where some thought, well, life had to have originated in this temperate zone, and they wouldn't have been able to get to the other one, so it's got to be possible. So there was a lot of debate on if there could be life in the temperate zone, or in the other temperate zone. So we're going to skip through the Middle Ages here to around the 15th century. This is a map of the known world by Ptolemy. Now, his original maps would have been from around 150 AD. And this really marks the beginning of the age of discovery. So his maps make a reappearance. Now, none of his maps survived, but his coordinates and his books did. And so this map was drawn from it. And you can recognize a lot of places here. You can see Europe right there. Now, Sri Lanka is a little bit bigger than it is in real life there. Saudi Arabia, perfectly recognizable there. We've got Africa, and we've got the Nile River. Great Britain is looking a little bit weird here, but you can tell what it is. And so Africa is attached to a landmass down here in the bottom. Now, nobody had sailed past, at least in Europe, had sailed past the torrid zone even at this point. So finally, a man named Gillies, he's a Portuguese explorer and sailor, he sails into the torrid zone. He survives. He comes back. He goes and does it again. And on the second time, he didn't find any humans, but he did find that there was probably life there. He found, I think, maybe a fire or something that had been abandoned. He found signs of life. And so that just opened the floodgates. People realized that you could actually sail into the torrid zone. And so in 1488, Bartolome Diaz, he sails around Africa, and it is very clear at this point that it does not connect to Terra Australis. 4 years later, Christopher Columbus discovers the Americas. It's thoroughly explored, and so the Terra Australis theory just shifts from being attached to Africa to now being attached to the Americas. So in 1520, Ferdinand Magellan, he sails through what we now know as the Magellan Strait. And to some, this seemed to confirm the existence of Terra Australis. So this is another map I brought with me today over here. Now, this is from 1624. It was also by Abraham Ortelius. And it's a map of the ancient world. It has the pyramids of Egypt on it, Abraham's route from Ur to Shechem. It has the lost tribes of Israel. But the important part for this presentation is there is an inset right here that shows the world at the time, and it has Terra Australis on it. And right here it says Tierra del Fuego. So Ferdinand Magellan, when he sailed through the strait, he said that people to his south, that he saw a lot of fires being started by the natives. So he called it Tierra del Fuego, which means land of fire. And some people believed that what he actually saw was Terra Australis. Now, not everyone believed that, because this other map that, again, I brought with me today, it's made a little bit later. It has the Tierra del Fuego actually being part of South America, which is where we know it to be a part of today, instead of some other continent. And then it has, again, this says Terra Australis Incognita. So Terra Australis, again, has it a little bit below South America. So just later in that century, Australia is possibly discovered. It's never really been completely proven, but the Portuguese might have discovered it before the Dutch did in the early 17th century. And some people say that this map is part of the proof. This is what was part of a set of maps called the Dieppe maps that were made in Dieppe, France. And it was thought that map makers in France were paying off Portuguese explorers and map makers for their information, because Portuguese were really secretive about their cartographic information. And then they were making these maps with that information, because it has a lot of Portuguese names on it. At the time, this was called Java La Grande. And again, you can see where it is connected to a large southern landmass. Over here on the left, this was published in an atlas, again, before the official Dutch discovery of Australia, and it looks like a kangaroo. And so again, some people say it's proof that the Portuguese actually discovered it first, but there are other marsupials in the region outside of Australia, such as in New Guinea. So maybe this was just supposed to be one of those animals. So the Dutch, they do discover Australia in the early 17th century, and they spend 150 years exploring it. And at the time, it was called New Holland, or they named it New Holland. Again, you would think this would get rid of the Terra Australis theory, but as you can see on this map, all it did was just shift the Terra Australis theory just a little bit farther over. And so it was thought that everything that had not been explored at this point must belong to Terra Australis. And so in the second half of the 18th century, James Cook, he is tasked with looking for the transit of Venus, or observing the transit of Venus. So watching Venus go across the sun. So he goes out into the Pacific Ocean, and while he's out there, or after they accomplish that first mission, he has a secret second mission, and he opens the letter, and the letter says, "Find Terra Australis." And so that's what they do next. They sail south, they go to New Zealand, they spend about 6 months there and make the first map of New Zealand, and then they sail to the east coast of Australia, go up and down Australia's coast, and clearly there was no Terra Australis there. So he's sent on a second mission, or a second voyage, and the second voyage is specifically to find Terra Australis. So you can kind of see it. He takes a couple dives into the Arctic zone here, or a few different dives here in the Arctic zone, and of course there is no Terra Australis because it doesn't exist. And so for a short period of time, we had a world map that looked like this, where we had no Terra Australis and we had no Antarctica. But he does make a correct prediction. James Cook says, there is a tract of land near the pole, which is the source of most of the ice, which is spread over this vast southern ocean. So at the same time, not everybody agreed with him. A British navigator and cartographer, Matthew Flinders, wrote in his book, A Voyage to Terra Australis, there is no probability that any other detached body of land of nearly equal extent will ever be found in a more southern latitude. So he didn't seem to think that there was going to be something else. But in 1820, let me back up for a second. So he said this with the argument that we should rename New Holland after Terra Australis, but instead of calling it Terra Australis, we should call it Australia, simply because he said that it sounded better. So that's how it got its name. In 1820, Antarctica was discovered, but it was too late. Australia had already gotten the name Australia, and they weren't gonna change Antarctica's name to Australia now that it was more southern. And so this is my last map of the day. I wanted to end with something more modern, just to kind of show that even though the world has been completely mapped for the most part, with the exceptions of maybe the ocean, map mistakes can still happen, maybe in different ways, and they still have the potential of having serious consequences. So this side is from 2010. This is more recent. And this is what was called the Google Maps War. And what happened was Nicaragua, a commander in Nicaragua's military, he sent troops into Costa Rica, into disputed territory, took down their flag and raised their own flag and then occupied it. And his excuse was that on Google Maps it said it was our territory. It was an international incident. It was sent to the United Nations, and then the United Nations, they helped solve it. And luckily, in Costa Rica's favor, at least for Costa Rica. This is called the Google Maps War. Luckily, no one was killed. Costa Rica didn't even have a military, so they couldn't really even defend themselves. That's my last map of the day. That concludes my presentation here. Are there any questions? No questions? Yes.
The definition, what is a cartographer?
Map maker.
Not involved with surveying?
Well, I guess it's kind of a vague definition. I mean, a surveyor could probably, still be considered a cartographer. I guess we kind of like separate the two sometimes, but I think a surveyor is still a cartographer.
They're using someone else's data to make that picture map. Is that correct?
They do, and so a lot of the information. A lot of the old maps are a combination of fresh survey work, using somebody else's survey work. So I guess there are a lot of, you could say, like armchair cartographers. They don't really leave, and they have other people that are doing it, and they're using other people's maps and other sources to make their one map, such as Jodocus Hondius. He wasn't going out on explorations, but he surrounded himself and had a lot of connections so that he could use their information to make his own maps. And some do both. John Smith was able to do both. Now he would make manuscript maps, but then somebody else would publish it, because you're typically not going to have an explorer that can both be an explorer, draw the maps, engrave the maps, and print it. So I guess anybody involved in that process could potentially be considered a cartographer. No problem. Yes?
How does Google Maps get the information to create their maps?
You know what, that's a good question. I know you can submit errors and stuff in it, and as far as the borders go now, I think that they've changed some of their policies on it now, because of border disputes and issues like this that came up, what they do now is, depending on what country you're in, it's going to look different. So if you go to India or China, their border disputes, it's going to show it as belonging to the other country. Now, I don't know how that's necessarily treated if you're crossing a border and don't realize you crossed into another country and they think you I don't know. That hasn't happened to me. I don't know how that's treated. I can see how that would potentially be an issue. But they have changed it now to where they show you different borders depending on what country you're in. So, unfortunately, like if you go to Russia, it shows the Crimea as belonging to Russia if you're there. But, if you're in Ukraine, it's going to show it as belonging to Ukraine. I don't know about, the recent stuff going on, I don't know if that's been updated. But I do know that Crimea, it switches sides depending on which side you're on. They don't want to lose their customer base, is basically what it is.
So Zach, you do this as a business. How would somebody get a hold of you, or you have places on the internet they can visit?
I do have one slide here. If you want to follow me on YouTube, I do have a lot of other map videos. I got some more old map videos coming out. I've got like 2 on the Lewis and Clark maps here in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, if you want to check me out there on all social medias, same thing. If you just type in Geography Geek, I should pop up.
And are you still doing maps to order?
I am still doing maps. It's all it was called Zach's Map Shop, but I integrated it to be a part of the YouTube channel just so it was under one name. So yeah, I do still make some maps, and I sell them on my website. It's just thegeographygeek.com.
Thank you.
So that concludes my presentation. If you want, you got a question?
Well, this kind of goes back to the old explorers. It just never occurred to me that somebody would put something on a map that they hadn't seen. Like these guys told me it was there. Thinking about the Salt Lake in Virginia, so they didn't have to represent like their state or their country or anything, or have any type of credentials or anything. They could just, because I'm assuming it would be a good thing to share information. So I guess that's really what they were trying to do, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe we underestimate or maybe underappreciate the flow of information now, how quickly and easily, I guess maybe it is to get around. And I guess you can build up a reputation that might make one explorer or cartographer, I guess, more credible than another. And I think some of these might have been even miscommunications of somebody putting on a map, but then rumors circulate, and then they think somebody doesn't know the difference. You see it today, don't know the difference between a rumor and something that's real, and then based off of what they've heard, they try to put it in like image form. And you kind of see this when you look at sea monsters, I think is a good representation of that. Because I've seen pictures of like a seahorse, and somebody tries to say, they saw a seahorse, and then they'll draw a picture and it's literally a horse with like fins. And whales, I've seen pictures of whales where they have, just look almost like deformed. And I think probably the maps probably do the same thing as, sometimes maybe a sailor maybe couldn't draw it or maybe articulate himself on exactly what happened, or maybe didn't draw it out perfectly, and then it turns up on a map, maybe not exactly how it's supposed to look. Yeah, the flow of information on some of these maps is, it gets a little bit wild, I guess. Any other questions? Yes.
Last. You say if someone has an interest in getting a map, they can contact you. What are some examples of the type maps that someone might ask for?
So the maps that I make are not really for practical purposes. The maps that I make are like decorative maps. So I make like people that like to go to like national parks. I have a map that has a checklist, and it has all like the national parks labeled. And so they might hang it on their wall and then check off all the national parks that they visited. And I have one for like Major League Baseball. And then sometimes I'll sell historic maps. Well, I don't sell historic maps, but I sell prints of the historic maps. And so, like some of them that you saw here, I sell on my website, and they're just printed. And then I do make a lot of national park maps. I made some like exaggerated relief maps. So it's all like for decorative purposes. It's not to use for navigation or anything like that. But I sell them on like quality paper.
Do you collect antique maps?
I do. I don't have a whole lot because it's kind of a pricey hobby, but I do. I brought a few with me today. I brought one of the ancient world, and I did bring one of them that has that inland Salt Lake. There's only 4. Now they made multiple copies, but there's only 4 maps in the world that were printed with that inland Salt Lake. I actually discovered the one that I found. It was in somebody else's, stock, and I was going through all their maps, and I noticed that it had the inland Salt Lake on it. And at the time, it was thought that there was only 3 printed that had it, and so now there's a 4th. And then I also brought the one by Enriquez Hondius that was a copy of the John Smith map from 1612. Any other questions?
Our son, Joe is his full name, Joseph Speed Williams, and the Speed goes back to John Speed.
Okay.
50-something to 1629, I think, in Britain, who did all these maps. He's been called and everything, we researched on that, a cartographer rather than a geographer or whatever. He never saw the places, well, he did in England because he did everything in Great Britain, British Empire. But among his old maps that the family has acquired, our son has one that is of the Carolina coast, and this is a late 1500s, if I recall, not early 1600s, where you are approaching it from the ocean, so west is up where north would be. And it shows the Carolinas, not separate between north and south, obviously. And the Great Salt Lake beyond the mountains.
Oh, really?
If my memory is correct, and I can tell, but I know we talked about that, seeing his version of that map.
Okay.
We
That is
have
really cool.
3 of his maps.
Oh, that's cool.
So,
Yeah, I'd love to take a look at those. Anybody got any other questions? All right, well, that concludes my presentation. If you want to come take a look at these, you can. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Zach.